Can you be Christian and a nationalist? This question of whether you can be a Christian and espouse nationalist beliefs, that is coming up a lot in our political world right now here in the United States. Obviously, we are in the United States, and so we are seeing a lot of issues of division, concern. People are having debates within families about how to interpret what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be an American? And how do you put those two things together? So can you be a Christian and a nationalist? This is the question we're going to consider today.
That sounds fun.
How is it showing up in your life right now, Christine, would you say?
I can honestly tell you that the nationalist movement for me eludes me a little bit. There seems to be a very, very striking group of people that claim to say and claim that this country is blessed by God and we should all be. See, I don't know. This is my problem. I don't know what nationalism is. I mean, I know it, but I can't say it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question to you is, what is nationalism? Because I don't know how to read that in my life.
Yeah. I think that is part of our problem right now, is that there's a lot of talk about Christian nationalism. And even if you look it up online, there's not one definition of what is a Christian nationalist. How do you define it? I guess, I've talked with you about this before, Christine, but I'll just say a little bit about my own history. I was an exchange student in Germany in high school, and this is going to age me. I was there in the year 1988 to 89. It was before the Berlin Wall came down. So it was still a divided Germany, East Germany and West Germany. Obviously, Germany had their own struggles with nationalism because National Socialism was a nationalist movement. So it privileged the German state, the German, as they called it, fatherland, over all other countries or identities. And it was a very particular kind of definition of the German identity. It only included what they called the Aryans, so that was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, which I always thought was really strange because Hitler himself, who was the leader of the National Socialists, was not bad.
Yeah.
Because Germany struggled with that, and then after World War II, they have been reckoning with that history of starting the Second World War, and all of the pieces that came with that, including the Holocaust, which killed 6 million Jews, and then there were millions more who were of other identities that were killed too. So it was, 6 million was just the people who were Jewish that were killed because they were not worthy to be in the German state. And so one of the things that, so I learned a lot about nationalism that year because in Germany, there's just simple things that we take for granted. So like in Germany, when I was there, people didn't hang the German flag in their house. They didn't hang the German flag outside their house because they saw any expression of nationalism as inherently dangerous.
Wow.
Yeah. And so just something as simple as that, where we have, you drive down a street in America and you'll have however many American flags hanging. They'll be hanging from businesses around the city. One of the ways this shows up is there's debates within churches in the United States. Is the U.S. flag in the sanctuary or not? Is that an appropriate thing to have a U.S. flag in the sanctuary? That is a question of nationalism, which identity is more important, your identity from a state or from your faith, you know? And so when you put a US flag in there, then what that is saying to some Christians anyway, is that your state identity, your civic identity is more important than your faith identity, and that's going to take priority. For example, when I was coming back to the United States, I wanted to bring back a German flag because I was just like, oh, if somebody came to the United States, we'd probably give them a flag. Well, I had to search high and low to find a flag that I could buy because at that time, it was still so rare for people to even want a German flag that you couldn't find them just in any store, just find them anywhere. You know what I mean? Whereas here, you could walk in, many stores in whatever town you're in probably and be able to get a flag, and we have a flag day that we celebrate every year. And so that's just one example of how Germans, having had that experience of what happens when a nationalist movement becomes the law of the land and the consequences of that. And how does that show up in the life of that country? They were so burned by that even in 1988, 89, they still would not hang flags and fly flags in neighborhoods and schools. You might get them in front of a government building, maybe, but a lot of times you wouldn't see a flag anywhere. So that was a really interesting experience for me to go to a country that was so suspicious of nationalism and what can happen in a country, and how when you privilege one state identity and a particular definition of that state identity, then there's all kinds of consequences that they could not support or agree with after the end of World War II. And so ever since then, many in the German world have been reckoning with that and trying to sort through what that means. And obviously, they're struggling with the rise of nationalism within their own countries, just like we are here in the United States. The other thing that was very interesting to me at the time when I was living in Germany is that many Germans would not identify first as Germans. They would say, I'm a European. I'm not German. I'm a European. Because there was so much weight, the weight of history, it was just hard for them because of what their ancestors in their country had done. They had a very hard time claiming the title of German. Now, I don't know if that's still the case or not, but that was definitely how it was in the late 80s. The other piece that I wanted to mention about the German identity and having such a narrow identification of who's German and who's not, Jewish people had been living in the territory of what is considered Germany for generations and centuries. However, Hitler came in, the National Socialists rose to power, and they decided that even though those people were born in those areas and their families had been there for generations, they were not considered German just because they had a different faith and the Germans believed they had a different ethnic and racial background. And so they, this group of Germans decided, well, this is who a German is and this is who is not German. And anyone who's not German has to leave. And so it became a very narrow definition of who is German or not and who could be in the country or not.
And your point that people of different cultures and ideologies, even if they've been here, however many, can just be taken. I mean, that's my husband and my kids,
So say more about that. Tell me more about your husband and your kids.
Well, my husband is Guatemalan. He is from LA. He is the child of two people who came from Guatemala to live here. He learned English from Sesame Street.
Oh.
Yeah. And didn't really learn full English until he got to school, but Sesame Street kind of set him up,
Okay.
and definitely believes that this is his country,
Mm-hmm.
loves his country.
Mm-hmm.
But as I'm hearing you talk about what happened in Germany, yeah, there's a little bit of a, oh, wait, he's only second generation. I mean, he's first generation born here.
Yeah.
Can he be taken?
Mm.
You know? And then my daughter, who looks just like him,
Mm.
just like him. You know, she's already had some things happen to her that just, you know, I think, you know, we talked about white privilege a lot in the past couple of years during the pandemic, during the Black Lives Matter. And the things that I learned about myself and the things that I saw about myself and were unaware of through my daughter and in some of her experiences. It was like a slap in the face. You know, she worked at a place, a furniture store, and was cleaning the furniture along with all of the other employees. But people walked up to her and asked if she did houses.
Wow.
And when she told me that, I mean, holy moly.
Yeah.
That's my baby. And to think that just because she doesn't look like me, I was like, oh my gosh.
Streaming from the heart of the Rockies, this is Religious Rejects. Watch, listen, and join the discussion at religiousrejects.com.
The question that we asked is, can you be a Christian and a nationalist? And you talked a lot about the flags. And while you were talking about that, I realized that the window that I just did for the cookware store downtown is in preparation for 4th of July. It's all flags. I mean, there's lots of red, white, and blue. I have a whole, you know, vase with flags in it, you know, because that is our national identity, that flag, 4th of July. So obviously, I mean, we don't have to go into what kind of Christian I think I am, but I do believe I love God, but I also love my country. Where is that line? Where does it go too far? And it's almost as if the way I sit back and see it, it's almost as if it's not even that it's just the moment we start putting a flag above people is the line, at least the way I see it, you know, as an idol. You couldn't burn the flag. That was bad. But then that's also free speech. So, you know, people would start fighting over that. Do I bend my knee or take my hat off or whatever during the national anthem and look at the flag? If I don't do that, am I not American? If I do that, am I American? Am I too obsessed with it? Like, where is the line?
Right.
It feels like is very hard. I even heard that during, you know, Pride Month, it's important to put the pride flag up, but also the American flag, so we can state that both are okay instead of one or the other.
Oh.
Have you not heard that?
I've not heard that.
Yeah. Trying to reclaim that American flag is not a symbol of Christian nationalism, but to remind people this is about our country and not a religion, and therefore trying to reclaim it. So whenever I put my LGBTQ flag out, I always put the American flag out as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah.
So, but you also brought up another point, the American flag in sanctuaries.
Oh, yeah.
I've been trying to rack my brain to remember, did I do that? Did I put was the American flag in the sanctuary? And I think it was.
Yeah.
I think it was. I know we had our denominational flag. We probably had the Christian flag, and I think you had the American flag as well.
Wow. Yeah.
And yeah, I did. But I never even thought about it.
Yeah. Didn't think about what that meant.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. So I think this is a really tricky conversation. I think that line between what is nationalism, what is not nationalism, and how do we define who is American, what are our American ideals, how do we define that? It's a tricky thing. What I want to do is kind of put all of this in some larger context, like I often like to do. The Pew Research Center came out with the results of a survey earlier this year in 2025, and it's comparing levels of religious nationalism around the world. What they're saying is that the long and the short of it is, so the results came out on January 28th, 2025. The amount of religious nationalism in the United States is lower than many countries in the world. It seems like a lot to many people, and there's been a lot of debate about the rise of Christian nationalism, obviously, here in this country. However, what we've been seeing is the rise of religious nationalism in various countries around the world. And so we're seeing it in India with the rise of Hindu nationalism. And so if we stop and think about, oh, wow, there's nationalism that isn't tied to being a Christian, but being a Hindu, or if someone is in Israel and they are a nationalist, then that is their form of religious nationalism, is a form of Judaism, not Christianity. And then there's Islamic countries where you have people who are Islamic nationalists. And so, you've got different ways that religious nationalism shows up, but it's showing up around the world more than it has in previous generations. And as I've been thinking about it, I do think that, part of what we've also seen in the last century or so is the rise in religious fundamentalism in general. So kind of this idea that people call it often like getting back to the basics sort of thing, and we see it sometimes, I think, like in the 10 Commandments, being in courthouses or in schools or whatever, wanting to get back to the basics. And the idea is that it's a religious identity to return to, and that it's a reaction against so much of the changes, the rapid change in the world in the last couple of centuries after the Industrial Revolution. And after the Enlightenment, the rise of, scientific theories and a lot of what we've learned about the world and science and physics and all this kind of stuff, the pace of change has been so dramatic and so fast that the reaction against all of that is to get back to the basics, and this idea of, oh, well, this is what it used to be like, so let's get back to that. And so I think the rise of religious nationalism mirrors this rise of religious fundamentalism. And we've seen fundamentalists movements within most of the main world religions around, so you'll see it in Hinduism, in Islam, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Buddhism. So it's a reaction against so much of this rapid pace of change. And when I think of it that way, I can have more compassion for it, because people are just reeling, I think, from trying to figure out, how do I make sense of all of this, even if I don't always agree with their methods, I would say, So that's one of the things that I've found helpful to think about, is that it's not just happening here, that it's happening around the world, and it's happening with different religions and in different countries. One of the issues that we've had when we've been talking about doing this as a topic for our podcast is, how do you define what being Christian and being a nationalist means? Like, there's not one definition. People who are studying this, people who are looking at these sorts of things, you can find different definitions. It's kind of slippery right now as far as being able to say, well, this is it, this is not it, and whatever. So the Pew Research Center, when they were doing their survey, they asked these questions. How important is belonging to the historically predominant religion to being truly part of your national identity? So, for example, how important is being a Muslim to being truly Indonesian, or being a Christian to being truly American? Another way of asking that question is, can you be an American and not be Christian? Can we You know, that's another way to ask that question. But that's not how they ask the question. That's another way to ask. So the second question is, how important is it to you for your national leader to share your religious beliefs? How much influence do you think the historically predominant religion's sacred text should have on the laws of your country? And when the sacred text conflicts with the will of the people, which should have more influence on the laws of your country?
Oh, that's a good one.
And so those are how the Pew Research Center was framing their questions and trying to determine levels of religious nationalism around the world. So it's kind of looking at, you know, how do you decide to make decisions based on laws and civic decisions or not? And I think it's a complicated question because, of course, most people of faith would say, well, of course, my faith influences how I live my life. And so it's going to affect how I make decisions about all kinds of things, you know? I think that's part of the reason why it's so difficult to define and to really be able to identify what we're talking about.
Right. And we just spent how many episodes breaking down all these different truths and ideas. So I remember back in the 90s when I was a youth leader and somebody, my mentor, coming to me just so concerned that we were losing absolute truth. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, we're not going to have absolute truth as a nation. That's really, really bad. And it didn't hit me till later that what is absolute truth? Like, I don't even know what absolute truth is. And if you're telling me that one group of people has the absolute truth and everybody else has to follow that, and it's based on something that, you know, again, how many different ways do you see scripture? Like one scripture. So whose truth am I following?
Yeah.
You know, you have some people's truth that say Jesus loved everybody. You have some people's truth that says he loved everybody, but some people are going to hell. And then you have, you know, Westboro Baptist over here that says, oh, gays and lesbians are going to hell. And it's like, I don't like their truth. Do you know what I mean? Like, so whose truth? So I never understood the phrase absolute truth to begin with. And now the older I've gotten, the farther away that I've gotten from that bubble that I was in, I just want to scream, whose truth? Why? And to me, that's the whole point of this country, is that this country was formed because nobody could agree on absolute truth.
Right.
Over there. So we all came here supposedly to live together.
Those of us who are of European descent who came here, who came here of our own volition or whatever, as
and
opposed
unfortunately, even those people that came here to try to live their absolute truth or whatever it is, had to slaughter people in their truth without wanting to see, or even give them the opportunity. Yes, thank you for correcting me on that one. But I mean, that was the whole thing, the hypocrisy of it. You don't get to live what you want. So you're going to come over here to say you can live what you want, but then not allow the people that are already here live how they want. I mean, it's just, and it all comes back down to God, seemingly.
Well, and it's a definition of how do you define what a Christian is, and then how do you define what an American is, or a German, or a Mexican, or a Chinese person? And should a civic identity also be tied to a religious identity or not, you know? And that's the question. One of the first things that I'm thinking about when you were talking is we've already shown how many different ways there are to see and interpret different things within the Christian tradition. I'm just going to say right off the bat, that question of who's Christianity, who's God, how do you read the Bible, what does that mean? Being able to find one answer to these questions, it seems irrational to me that you could find one way of being Christian. We have how many denominations?
Exactly.
How many Christian denominations in this country? So which Christian denomination gets to pick what it means to be a Christian. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, much less all the people who aren't even Christian, you know?
And that brings up a really interesting point. We talked about certain states are now putting up the 10 Commandments. Okay. Let's not even go into the fact that the 10 Commandments are actually from Judaism.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Let's be clear.
But the Christians have claimed them.
Mm-hmm.
The Christians are going to put them up. And they're going to rely on these, God bless teachers. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But they're going to rely on these teachers to supposedly teach them. What's going to happen when you have a Baptist versus an Episcopalian or a Catholic teaching from, they all believe in the 10 Commandments, but they see them differently, possibly, or they interpret them differently.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen then? Are we going to get smaller? Is it going to be whatever political party then is in? Like, if there's more Southern Baptists in the political party, they're going to have more weight on their argument over the Catholic Christians? So, like, who wins there? Do we just continually keep dividing out, dividing out, and dividing out?
Yeah.
Because now it's like, you're right. You're going to slap those things up there and expect some poor teacher to explain to these children what it means to covet, what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. Granted, we can all get murder, but like, to put your God before anything else, which is really interesting if we're going back to, like, the flags and stuff. Are we putting the flag before God? Or are we putting God before the flag? Are we putting our nation before God or God before our nation?
Yeah.
How are they supposed to just... We can't even do it.
Right.
For thousands of years, we can't do it.
Christians can't agree about anything.
But we're going to put it into kindergarten class and pray they get it. I mean, maybe that's what God was saying, that the children will teach us. I don't know. But
Thinking about that, I think, that kind of gets at this question of, the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. Or, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. And so it's about idolatry,
Yes.
And that is one of the arguments that people make about the flag is the American flag an idol to some people? Is that more important than God themselves? And so that's an important question I think each of us can ask ourselves. The other thing I was wondering is, let's think through, so we've got the 10 Commandments as one example. And of course, there's lots of talk about not having idols and things like that, not putting anything else before God. When we think about who Jesus was, what does the life of Jesus tell us about nationalism and how this affects this conversation?
That's the crux of it. Here you have Jesus in the wilderness, being called out into the wilderness, and he is tempted by Satan in 3 different ways. One is to turn his stone into bread so he can eat because he's been fasting. I think that goes a little bit deeper. I think that's more about, like, just getting uncomfortable or getting comfortable when you are uncomfortable. And sometimes we need to sit in that and just running around and fixing it. And then you've got the other ones where Satan says, look at all of this. You can have all of this. All you have to do is bow down to me. And it's about power. And it's interesting. Well, not interesting. It's God. It's Jesus that he says, no, that's not what I'm here for.
Mm-hmm.
And walks away. You see as well these disciples continually waiting for this Messiah who is going to deliver them out of the hands of the Romans and into some glorious place. But in their minds, they think it's going to be violent. They think this is the king that's going to take them and deliver them. And they're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting. Jesus never does it. And I find it fascinating that even at the moment when Jesus is being arrested and the disciples are there and Peter's like, oh, heck no, pulls out a sword to cut off the ear of a soldier to protect him. Jesus is like, no. That's not what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole life was about saying, no, you have it wrong. No, that's not what it's about. The whole Gospels. And yet, there are Christians that seem to miss that repeatedly. Just like the disciples believed they knew what kind of Messiah was coming, and in the end realized their error, and that what they thought was going to happen was not what Jesus had planned. I think that there's so many people today that believe we are supposed to be a Christian nation because then God will bless us. Which, aren't we pretty blessed as it is? I don't know how much more blessed we can be as the richest nation in the world. And to have the things that we have.
Yeah.
But somehow God needs to bless us more. And to believe that we can do that by voting the right way, by putting in the right people in, and squashing those that we feel are wrong and are not of this ideal, which is very similar to Hitler. Not of the ideal, get him out. You're not of the ideal, get him out. That's what's happening in my mind in this world. Is just the squashing of the non-ideals in order to create this place that God will bless even more. And I just don't see how God is okay with that at all.
One of the things I've been thinking about in relation to this debate about nationalism and Christian identity in the United States is the concern, back after 9/11 and people being worried about Sharia law or Islamic law taking over the law of our country. And I find that really fascinating because if people don't want Islamic law taking over our country's legal system, why do you think that we want Christian legal, whatever Christian laws would be, if we're going to go back to the laws from Leviticus and Deuteronomy or whatever, however you would define it, why would we want those to be the law of the land? That doesn't make sense to me. Again, it's an argument that doesn't hold up. It's many of the same people who are against, and I'm not saying we should have Sharia law. I think there's a reason that our country did not marry religious belief with the civic structure. We do not have a king. We do not have a king who is the head of the church, which is the tradition from Great Britain, which the United States split from. And we don't believe that God ordained the king to be the head of our church. We just don't. That's not part of our religious belief here in the United States. And so these things don't all hold up to me. Like we wouldn't want another religion's legal code being the law of the land. So why would we force our religious legal code on everybody else? I think we want to be good citizens. We want there to be a fair representation that's not biased towards one religion or another.
You would think that's what we would want, yes. And I believe that's exactly how it was started. I do not believe that the founding fathers were all Christian men wanting to have a Christian nation. The original motto of our country was out of many, one. And just that idea alone of out of all of these diverse people, out of all of these thoughts, out of all of these groups, out of all of these tribes, out of all of these very unique people, we are one nation. And I love that.
Yeah.
And it kind of sounds like heaven to me. If we want to go back a few episodes, that feels like heaven. Like there's going to be a whole lot of people all there.
Yeah.
Totally different things, but we're all one.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that.
Right.
I will say that what people think, well, what our motto apparently is now since the 1950s, and I want to be clear, it was since the 1950s that this is our country's motto, not from when the founding fathers, is in God we trust. And I read this from the Center of Religion in Public Life by Gary Peluso Verdant. And if I'm not pronouncing that right, so sorry, Gary.
Mhm.
But he writes, "In God we trust is an aspiration at best and a lie at worst for any nation, especially one with the history's largest military, economy, and worldwide media influence. Then consider the insane number of guns, estimated 393 million owned by U.S. citizens, including unregulated militias, and the protections afforded nearly any adult's capacity to own a weapon of mass destruction. How is it we can say, in truth, in God we trust?"
Whoa. Yeah, I mean, that's so true.
Yeah, we don't.
We don't.
We
No,
absolutely
we
don't.
absolutely do
In
not.
guns we trust.
Yeah.
In our economy we trust.
Mhm.
In our power we trust. In
Mhm.
our military might we trust.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have any of those things, would we still trust God? Or would we be angry at God?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think what we're getting at too is a certain idea of what it means to be an American, who is an American, and who defines what that is. And many times it is white people of European descent who are trying to define that that's, certain people are American and other people are not. And unfortunately, because of the history of enslaving Africans and other peoples, we have a history of racism in this country that we cannot ignore. And so far too often, and you alluded to this when you talked about your husband and your children, that when people are not white, there's all these assumptions that you are not an American then, that somehow you are not a true American. So again, it's like defining, who gets to say who's an American, who's not, what color are they, what language do they speak? And I mean, we have American citizens who don't speak English because they did come from another country. Does that mean that they're not an American? I don't know. I mean, if they've fulfilled all the requirements and they stood before a judge and took the oath of citizenship, it seems to me that
Which
they're,
is all we ask.
yeah, that they are American.
This is Not Your Pastor's podcast. We ask the questions they told us not to. This is Religious Rejects.
Jesus never took up arms against the Roman occupiers of Jerusalem and Judea, his homeland. Now, it's interesting because ever since the Roman Empire made Christianity the religion of empire, I think that our religious faith as Christians has really struggled with this tension of how do you navigate being a faithful religious person as a Christian and then also a citizen of whatever state you're a part of. It's interesting because one of my professors in seminary, he studied this, Professor Jack Forsman. He wrote a book called Christian Faith in Dark Times. And what he did was he looked at 6 German theologians in the lead up to World War II. 3 who ended up supporting Hitler and 3 who ended up not supporting Hitler.
Wow.
And he asked the question, is there something in the Christian faith that recognizes evil as it's arising? Most people today can agree that National Socialism was an evil form of government and that it created a tremendous amount of harm in the world. And, he ended up deciding, that is a problem within Christianity, is that we do not have a clear way of being able to recognize ultimate evil when we see it. And that there's a lot of theologies that missed the rise of National Socialism and all of what happened and came from that. And so what that says to me is that we as Christians need to have a lot of humility about how certain we are that God is in this particular governmental structure or this particular decision or whatever. I think that it tells us that we are flawed in how well we can determine what is good or evil at any given point, that we are human and we can make mistakes, and that sometimes we can really underestimate how much harm certain decisions can make. And so that has always kind of stuck with me as far as the Christian faith not being well equipped to actually be able to recognize evil as it's starting to rear its head, as it did with National Socialism. And so that has always kind of haunted me, looking at the work that he did in that book. It's sobering.
Does it go back even further? Because the Israelites begged God for a king. And how many times did God say to them, please trust me on this? You don't want a king.
Yeah.
We want a king. No, really, you don't want a king. We want a king. And so he gave him a king. And then all heck broke loose.
Mm-hmm.
It is. We think we know what's good for us, but we don't necessarily see the evil or the corruption that can happen.
Yeah.
And how people can just start to steer things away from God into and even just create a God in their own version. And I think that's a lot of it too. What do I want my God to do? Well, he has to bless me and my family.
Right.
To the exclusion of other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sad.
It is sad.
Thanks for tuning in. Up next, will the rejects keep, rethink, or reject today's topic? Stay with us.
Keep, rethink, or reject. Can you be a Christian and a nationalist?
Based on how we define nationalist, then no. But that doesn't mean that I can't have my flags and be proud of my country. I think it all comes back down to the whole not putting my country before God in that sense. I think that's where the line, and thinking of myself better than, my country is better. We're more blessed. I think that it's little phrases like that we keep reiterating that will then blossom into that idea that you really start to believe it. And I don't think that God blesses the United States of America over Canada, England,
Right.
Africa. I don't know. We're all, of the many, we are one. And that's how, isn't that the song we sung? Isn't that what they taught us? That the whole world in his hands and we're all God's children. Like, isn't that what they taught us as kids?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
I also reject the idea that you can be a Christian and a nationalist. And to your point about flags and all that, there is a distinction between being a patriot and being a nationalist. And what one scholar does, she makes the distinction between patriotism is motivated out of a love for your country, whereas nationalism is based on a hate of people who are not of your country.
I like
which is
that.
an interesting distinction, I think,
Yeah.
and I think that's really helpful. So, but today where I come down is I would say, no, you cannot be a Christian and a nationalist, because again, to me, it's like the order of what's most important to you is if you put your country first, that means it's out of order.
Yeah.
In my mind, against everything that has been handed to us in scriptures and through the way Jesus lived and taught his life. And I recognize how complicated this is. There's a lot here. There's a lot of pieces to this. And so one of the things we really wanted to open up with this today is, what are you struggling with? What are the questions that you have? What kind of conversations have you been having with your loved ones in your workplaces, in your schools, at home, around the Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners? We would really like to hear more from you about what is going on in your lives and how you're grappling with this issue, because it's something that I think most people are having to think about, to talk about, and decide, kind of what where is the line for
Right.
individual people?
Agreed. So let us know, drop some comments, email us, and let's get a conversation going about this. I think this is an important topic and one that needs to be, not that we're going to figure it out, but at least figure out how we can course correct. Is there a way to course correct from here?
How do we talk about this together, even if we're
Yeah.
talking with someone who doesn't share a similar belief? How do we talk about this? How do we address it? How do we continue to be Americans together in this country, even when we have different beliefs? You know, I think these are really important questions, and they're really hard and complicated questions. So we want to hear from you. So
Icky question.
icky questions. You said it first.
I
Icky
did.
questions. Thanks for listening today, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.